Academy of Vietnam. And joining him on stage, we are honored to welcome our distinguished speaker, Professor Yan Shui-tung from Tsinghua University. Dr. Nguyễn Hồng Sơn, the floor is yours.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, welcome to the afternoon session, which is going to begin with a fireside chat. And joining me on the fireside is Professor Yan Shui-tung. Professor Yan Shui-tung needs no introduction. Anyone who follows China, and especially China's international relations, must know Professor Yan Shui-tung. Professor Yan Shui-tung is a renowned scholar, one of the China's most known international relations scholars from Tsinghua University. Nearly 20 years ago already, he was rated by Foreign Affairs magazine as one of the top 100 global thinkers. And back in 2013, he published a book, and the book is called Inertia of History: China and the World in the Next 10 Years, where Professor Yan Shui-tung tried to predict the world in 10 and 15 years' time. And today we reassessed Professor Yan's prediction back then, and the rate of accuracy is more than 80%. So that's why I have him on this fire chat, so that he can help us understand the future. And we hope that we can learn a lot from his wisdom, his vision of how the world is going to be like in, say, 10 or 15 years' time. Hence the topic of today's fire chat, the evolving strategic landscape and major powers dynamic, what it means to ASEAN. So I will begin by inviting Professor. It's an honor to have you on this stage. So let me invite you to deliver your initial remarks, and then I'll be joining you in the subsequent conversations. Please, Professor.
Thank you, Dr. An Ying, and first for the invitation to this very impressive forum, and also thank you very much for the introduction. And like Dr. Ying said, that I published a book predicted the change of the global order during the 2013 to 2023. And now last year, by the December of last year, I published another book, Inflection of the History, predicted the change of the global order from the 2025 last year till the 2035. So in 10 years, there will be another exam or the check about how much the forecast proved to be false. And actually, from the 2013, I have argued that, and we are not returned to the Cold War. You heard a lot of people talking about new Cold War. Actually, this kind of talking started from the 2014. It's already 12 years. New Cold War never come. Why? And my view is that new Cold War won't come in next decade. The reason is that the Cold War is defined by ideological expansion, the competition between two superpowers for expanding their political systems. But now you see that the major powers competition is not a focus on the ideology, but on technology. This morning, we heard a lot of politicians or these national heads use the word AI, or artificial intelligence. I'm not so sure how much they know about the challenge of AI, but actually this is something will play a very important role to shape the global order in the coming decade. And in some ASEAN countries, people may feel something is emerging, but in China, it's not emerging. In China and the US, it's already a reality. Professors are challenged by students who tell the professor, we do not need you to tell us about knowledge. We can learn from AI. And professors are challenged by students. They're doing everything with AI, and they know more than professors' specialty. Okay, that's only a small phenomenon of the age of the digital age. And the competition between China and the US are heavily focused on the digital technology. And early period on the chips, now it's a shift toward the AI. And then what does it mean? It means that there are going to be two sets of digital technology standards. And there will be another two technology market. That's a two type of technological or AI services. And all of these will make this the international order are very different from before. In what way? Traditionally, you will see the major powers compete each other in natural space. But the digital technology creates the cyberspace. The competition between the major powers now is went on simultaneously in natural space and the cyberspace. And what we see is that the competition will heavily focus in cyberspace. The competition in cyberspace will play more role in the competition in the natural space. So you find that the idea or the theory of the geopolitics and cannot explain all of this change. And when the geopolitics use geopolitical factors to explain conflicts, you cannot understand how the US cannot win the war against Iran. The military gap is so huge. Why? And then US have withdrawn the troops of the Gulf. They cannot even protect their own military base. When US cannot protect their own military base, how can they protect their allies as countries? And in what way? And you find the zone is so effective, used in the battleground. It's heavily reliant on AI. Okay, what I'm going to talking about, in the coming period, the most serious challenge comes from AI. It will be combined by what? By G0. That means there's no global leadership. There's no global leadership. Chinese government has clearly rejected the idea of G2. When there's no global leadership, the question is that who is going to maintain the regional stability in different parts of the world? That's my personal view. There's two types of the international orders. One type of the order based on leaders. That's a leader-based international order. There's another type of order. It's based on leaderless. Without leadership, the states still can organize their regional peace. The typical case is Pacific Island states. They're very small, they're militarily very weak, but they can maintain a durable peace in that region. ASEAN, this morning we heard, all of these leaders of ASEAN countries are part of the ASEAN. ASEAN keep the general peace from 1991. How can they maintain the general peace for this region? Based on no leadership. So in the future, we are going to witness two kinds of regional orders. Regional order with the leadership, maybe like in Europe, unfortunately, and the European leadership cannot guarantee peace in that region. And for ASEAN, Southeast Asia, there's no leadership, but they can keep a durable peace. Okay, and the third thing I want to discuss about, and moving along with the progress of a technology and the decline of the global leadership, now we find that the international is facing a very unfortunate situation. the international morality is declining. In what way? There's a lack of international strategic credibility. That's why people are talking about we need to build the confidence. We need to build up the mutual trust. Wait a minute. How can we make countries trust each other? People can only trust those who keep their promise good. You can't trust those countries, and they never keep their promise good. So in that way, and strategic credibility is become a crucial element for maintaining regional cooperation, regional stability, and regional peace. And unfortunately, this also ironically, the technological progress are not combined with the improvement of international morality, but combined with immorality. What we observed that in Gaza, and since the purpose attack, a killing women and children in Gaza, we find that there's the war. They purposely target civilian buildings, facilities, institutions, and civilian people. So these are kind of a moral backward. And so this is a new situation. On the one hand, materially, we see the world moving forward. We call it a material civilization. But in terms of spiritual civilization, human beings did not make any progress in the current age. The final point I want to make here is that how the ASEAN to do, right? You ask me. I think ASEAN already have its own regional architecture, help to maintain the regional stability. But then, from my understanding, there's two things for ASEAN to concern. First is concern how to improve the strategic credibility of each state of members. That is a part of the confidence building. If you make the national leadership of each member have a moral stance and follow the international norm and have create their strategic credibility, it will make the cooperation among the 11 countries stable, durable. Second, I think this ASEAN also have to concern the regional relationship with the Northeast Asia. Southeast Asia only part of the East Asia, but the whole region, I mean the East Asia, Southeast Asia, and Northeast Asia put together, the whole region have to keep the general peace from the 1991. So how can we keep this general peace for the large region as long as possible? The last thing is about AI and how the ASEAN countries are dealing with AI. From my understanding, the AI do not only challenge the relations among the nations, and AI will challenge the social stability at home. Every country, including China and the US, no matter how strong the country in terms of AI technology, and then the AI will change the social relations. This morning we heard a lady raise the question, if the AI takes the jobs away, how can we deal with them? Especially for those countries, their economy heavily rely on the labor-intensive industry. And AI do not only take the jobs from traditional works, AI also changes relations. Just now I informed my colleagues that in the university, students show less and less respect to professors because they ask the professor, why I should learn the knowledge from you? How much of the knowledge will help me to get a job? How much knowledge will create a better future for me? And it's very difficult for a professor to answer the question because we know, and the AI will become no more than every individual in general. And so how can make a human being more creative master AI rather than only master knowledge. And so finally, I think in the future, the relationship between ASEAN countries will also be defined by the technologies relationship among you. And also the relationship between ASEAN and China also will be defined by what? By technology relations. Because in cyberspace, digital technology will generate most of the wealth of a human being. And the whole nation's security will heavily rely on what? Cyber security. Without cyber security, you won't have a national security. Thank you very much. That's just my brief.
Thank you very much, Professor, for a very thoughtful and future-oriented remarks. Now, this morning we heard from our Prime Minister who said that technology is redefining the power of nations. And now you essentially are saying that technology is also redefining geography, because competitions for power is moving from Asia or Europe or Africa to a completely new domain, and that is the cyber. And the dynamics in that space is very different, and the rules is yet to be fully established. So it's a lot of ideas that packed into 10 minutes of presentation, so thank you very much. I would like to pose the first questions, and then I'll open the floor for the audience to also interact with the professor. In your book in 2013, you predicted a bipolar world, whereby you essentially is saying that there is going to be a decoupling between the major powers, not necessarily a Cold War kind of decouple, but yet a competitions that leads to decoupling. And yet, in the recent summit between China and the United States, the two countries agreed to build a constructive and strategically stable relationship. So essentially, there's efforts to manage the relationship. Do you foresee a constructive and strategically stable relationship in the cyber domain between the US and China?
Well, I think this is a very crucial issue for both China and the US. How can we stabilize our relationship when the technology competition will become intensified? And for instance, the AI have applied to military. And now there's a question. Can we apply the AI to nuclear weaponry system? If let AI make the final decision about whether we should push the button, that's really dangerous. So from my understanding, when China talking to the US, we initiated the concept, the strategic stability. And actually, I think we got a positive response from American side. They think this is really serious. This is not only related to our relations, and also possibly for the global security. So my understanding, China and the US already have a working teams work together talking about what is, in terms of economy, and what should be the white list. Should not set sanctions on each other, maintain the basic economic relations. In the terms of security, they also concerned that, hey, what kind of military competition we should avoid? Inevitably, there's a military competition, but we have a guardrail to guard this competition. So especially in AI period, and a lot of things are so new, we don't know. But we know it's possibly create a kind of a disaster. It's not for nation. It's not a national disaster. Could be a global disaster. So I hope the whole world understands why China and the US agree on this term, strategic credibility. That means prevent the competition escalating into war.
Thank you very much, Professor. My second question is about ASEAN. ASEAN is based on geography. ASEAN is founded to essentially manage its geographical interactions with external partners. And ASEAN has been successful and, in your words, protected its credibility for being neutral, being an honest player that connect itself with a large number of partners. But now the geography definition is changing. In your views, how ASEAN can preserve its credibility in the race in the new domain?
Okay. So if you look at the relationship between ASEAN and China, also this relationship are different in natural space or the geospace and the cyberspace. In cyberspace, you find some countries, some ASEAN countries, they use Chinese technology. That what I mean. It means that they will develop the common market. That we use same technology, they will use the same products, and then they have this technology cooperation. But some countries said no. For their own security concern, and as a kind of weird concern, they said they want to rely on Americans' technology. And the two technologies are two different systems. And for rich countries, it's okay. They purchase two kinds of technologies, like a Gulf states. They can wear two watches, right? And your one watch broke, and they use the other watch. But for most of the developing countries, they don't have that kind of economic resources to purchase two sets of the technologies. So then they have to make their own decision, which technology they will use. Because nowadays, the digital technology is not only judged by the advance or advantage of the technology, but also judged by what? The low price. And AI has applied not for military, for the daily life. How can you provide an ideology people affordable? That's why the price is a crucial element, have the influence. Have impact on the relationship. What I mean that if you look at the cyberspace, you will find that some ASEAN countries have a close technology relationship with China, and some have a close technology relationship with the US. But if you look at these geographical relations, the situation are not the same. And they maybe geographically, they are close doing more business with China, trade, than with the US. So I mean that in the future, not only the ASEAN-China relationship are different in cyberspace and natural space, the whole world will be different. We see two different strategic relations in these two spaces.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to open up the floor to invite questions. All right, any hands? All right, I have 1, 2 hands on my right here. So the lady in, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 row, please introduce yourself. And then there's a gentleman also around that table. Okay.
Hi. Hello?
Yeah, it works. It works.
Just need to shout a little louder.
Okay.
Hello. Thank you, Professor, for your insights. I'm an ASEAN Future Forum youth delegate, and I wanted to ask, when you speak about technology completely redefining our relationships, how do we first deal with how the kind of competition for critical minerals that are needed for this technology to develop, how do we deal with the relationships that that's defining? Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to collect one more question. The gentleman on the... Yeah. Would you like to raise your hand so we can see you? Okay, go ahead.
Good evening. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Professor and Dr. Nguyen Hung Sơn. I'm currently at the Faculty of Foreign Languages at the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam. So my question is that, do you think that ASEAN country should have, what approach towards AI technology should ASEAN country have? Should we have a facilitation toward the technology, or should we have a more techno-pessimist approach to the AI advancement? Because as you can see that they've created a lot of advancement in the recent years, but also it created a lot of risk in job displacement and dehumanization. Thank you.
Thank you. 1/3 question. Any hands? All right. Okay, one hand. Okay. Right there, the lady in white.
Good afternoon. I'm one from the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam, and I have a short question for Professor Yan. So you gave us quite a pessimistic, prediction of the world. Do you think the U.S. and China, any one of them, trying to avoid that kind of pessimistic future? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you have enough questions.
Okay. Well, the first question is about the rare earths. My understanding, rare earths is one of the three basic elements for AI industry. Well, rare earths, electricity, and intelligence. At this moment, there's a competition or problems, conflicts between China and the US about the rare earths. But at this moment, that factor do not determine everything. At this moment, most serious element is electricity, because the AI demand a huge amount of electricity supply. And by this moment, both China and the US try to dramatically increase their electrical productivity. So from my understanding, this is more crucial at this moment than rare earths. And I don't think in short term we can see there's any conciliation between China and the US on the rare earth conflicts. And because Americans set sanctions on China, on Chinese companies, so it's brought about China's retaliation with the rare earths. So if US and turn its policy on sanctioning Chinese technology progress, I think they definitely can find a way to develop cooperation on rare earths. The second thing about the strategy for available strategy for the AI, for ASEAN to do the AI program. I have no idea about what the strategy is suitable for ASEAN, but I know, and generally speaking, by now, there's only two countries that can produce or offer the fundamental models, China and the US. So most of the countries try to use these models, develop their own apps. So they do a lot of application research and make a progress. And some countries even do not have that kind of capability for application research. So they have to purchase technologies from the other countries, AI surveys from the other countries. But how can these countries to deal with the AI challenge? My understanding, they have to reform the education. Not only for ASEAN countries, including US and China, all the universities, middle schools and primary schools have to reform their education. What means reform? That means how can you make the young generation and more capable to master AI for creation? This is a good opportunity for those countries and do not that advanced in terms of AI, because even for the United States and China face the same challenge. And I don't think these two countries has already have their strategy to dealing with this social challenge. So my personal view that we need to reform the education and to make the young generation to have a strong capability to master AI. The last thing is about the China-US conflict. At this moment, I'm pessimistic. I don't think the conflict can be settled. But I'm also optimistic about that when China and the US agree on the strategic stability. When they agree on this concept, that means they can manage the conflict between them from escalating into war. As long as these two powers compete peacefully without going to war, I think it's a kind of a lucky for the world.
Well, thank you very much, Professor. There's a lot of ideas, there's a lot of predictions there. And if the ASEAN's Future Forum will continue, I'm sure in 5 years' time, we will come back and reassess your prediction. Thank you very much, and please join me in thanking Professor Yan Shuitong.
Thank you very much, Professor Yan, for keeping it 100% real and candid with us today. We absolutely adore how you made such complex global issues sound so engaging and lively. And of course, this very conversation wouldn't be complete without our moderator. So a huge thank you to Dr. Nguyen Hung Son for the masterclass moderation. And of course, a lot of good questions from the AFF delegates. Ladies and gentlemen, moving right along, we officially open plenary session 2, dedicated to promoting ASEAN initiatives on conflict prevention. And please welcome our moderator, Her Excellency Gillian Bird, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Australia to Vietnam. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone to this very important session on conflict prevention. I think, as everyone in this room would be very well aware, we all face an increasingly contested geostrategic environment, and preventing competition from degenerating into conflict is really a key challenge for us all. A few people have already referred to General Secretary and President Tolam's Shangri-La address, but it was really noteworthy that in that address he underscored the importance of preventive diplomacy as a strategic capability, not something that should just be deployed once conflict had erupted. He also very pertinently noted that many crises arose not simply because of conflicting interests, but because the parties concerned lacked trusted channels for communication, space for de-escalation, and mechanisms capable of guiding confrontation towards dialogue. His very timely observations really closely align with Australia's own outlook and approach, and really in today's deteriorating strategic environment, conflict prevention and risk reduction are at the very heart of regional and global discussions. So the questions for today's session are really practical ones. How does ASEAN stay ahead of conflict, not just respond to it? And what concrete initiatives can we take forward to safeguard peace, stability, and prosperity? Let me offer 3 very brief reflections to help guide today's discussion. First, we can all be more proactive. We all have a role to play. We can help develop tools that help identify risks early and prevent escalation. Second, we can do more to strengthen dialogue, because communication remains the most fundamental guardrail against misunderstanding. And third, we all have a role to play in strengthening rules and institutions, with ASEAN centrality and a rules-based order as fundamental to stability and conflict prevention. We have, fortunately, 3 excellent lead speakers for this session. Ms. Suzumi Nakamitsu, Under Secretary General of the United Nations and High Representative for Disarmament Affairs. Senior Under Secretary Isidro L. Purisima, Deputy Presidential Advisor, Office of the Presidential Advisor on Peace, Reconciliation and Unity of the Philippines, and His Excellency Dr. Chom Widja, Secretary General, ASEAN Inter-Parliamentary Assembly. Just a gentle reminder to our speakers, we have a maximum of 7 minutes so that we can allow the maximum time for discussion. With that, let me invite our first speaker, Under Secretary General Nakamitsu, to take the podium. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador, and it's so great to see you again here in Hanoi. I will speak very informally rather than a prepared statement, and I try to respond to the three questions that were put to me by the organizers related to conflict prevention. And of course, you have already mentioned President Tolam's wonderful speech at Shangri-La. I'm not going to repeat that, but I wanted to cite one part. He said that the objective is to create credible diplomatic off-ramps before parties become drawn into spirals of escalation that heighten the risk of conflict. So how can we actually achieve these objectives? So the first question that put to me was, what new tools, mechanisms, or frameworks should ASEAN develop? I make three very quick suggestions. The first one is to create risk reduction and de-escalation mechanisms with diverse communication and consultation channels that involve, for example, incident management mechanisms and with different kinds of stakeholders, for example, between militaries, security agencies, maritime law enforcement agencies that are very important in this region. So from that perspective, ASEAN could potentially expand military transparency measures, and I will come back to this, deconfliction mechanisms and hotlines, and humanitarian confidence building measures. These are often the first line of defense, if you will, against conflict escalation, and as such, it is a very important prevention mechanism as well. The second suggestion is to connect analysis and actions, which will amount to closing the early warning to the gaps between close early warning mechanisms and make it closer to early action mechanisms. And these will include, for example, regional risk monitoring mechanisms that will monitor not just political tensions, but arms flows, for example, cyber incidents, hate speech trends, etc. These actually are quite useful mechanisms to detect what might be potentially developed into more serious risks. And then the quiet diplomacy protocols can be triggered when risk indicators cross certain thresholds. The third practical suggestion is a strengthened transparency as a core prevention tool. We know that transparency actually builds confidence, and in this area, ASEAN could potentially, for example, develop peer review mechanisms, voluntary peer review mechanisms, and on the regular basis will probably amount to something that will be quite useful in the future. Shared digital transparency platform is another one to prevent serious cyber incidents in the region. And then these are basically aiming towards normalizing compliance and therefore reducing sensitivities of these actions and then eventually build trust. The second question, how can ASEAN better leverage its external partnerships, including with dialogue partners, to strengthen rather than complicate regional conflict prevention efforts? Here I go through very quick 5 suggestions. Number 1, use ASEAN-led platforms more strategically, and mechanisms like ASEAN Regional Forum, intersessional meetings can host structural and forward-looking dialogues on key peace and security debates with a view to finding opportunities for consensus in such forums. But move beyond exchange of views towards consensus building and practical outcomes that are actionable. Second, focus partnerships on concrete prevention themes. This is key. The themes can be, for example, maritime transparency and TCBMs. Example is called for unplanned encounters at sea, cyber confidence building measures, emerging technologies and guardrails, what are the issues that you see as a collective shared understandings as potential risks. And it is very important, again, discussions to translate into operational measures rather than just generalities. The third, preserve ASEAN centrality while enabling complementarity. So external actors really need to support ASEAN-led process. The fourth, prioritize risk reduction over strategic competition. And there is a tendency for external engagements, partners, to focus on deterrence. However, prevention requires also confidence building, dialogue facilitation, transparency support. So the key test here, I think, what you might really remember is to ask always, do partnerships reduce uncertainty or deepen strategic mistrust? Fifth and the final, leverage global regional links. Regional efforts can be reinforced by UN endorsement for mediation outcomes. Alignment with global normative frameworks will give you an important source of legitimacy. In other words, this combination really strengthened legitimacy, sustainability, and political weight of prevention efforts. The third question, the final, and here it is very quick. Understand what drives ASEAN momentum. ASEAN initiatives gain traction, we know, when they are incremental rather than transformative, but still with a longer-term vision, voluntary before institutionalized, focus on capacity building and transparency rather than restriction. So these are very important standards to create momentum. In other words, find a feasible political entry point, such as transparency discussions. And in recent times, we have seen actually really good examples. For example, cyber, ICT security areas. There's a clear area of political will amongst ASEAN's member states. ASEAN has demonstrated ARF framework plan for ICT security that was already there in 2015 and taking a very strong progress in the region and now also contributing, as I mentioned, at the global level discussions as well. So these are some of the suggestions and responses to the three questions that were given to me. Thank you. I stay here? Okay.
Thank you very much, and thanks for those very concrete suggestions on how ASEAN can indeed become more proactive in preventing conflict. I think we have time for just one or two questions from the floor, so if anyone would like to ask the Under-Secretary General a question, please put your hand up. My eyesight's not that good. Is anyone, can I see any hands up there? If not, maybe you were so comprehensive, you've answered everybody's questions. So thank you very much. That was really useful. Thank you. Thanks again. Lovely seeing you. Let me introduce our second speaker and invite him to the floor. Senior Under-Secretary Purishima, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, first of all, I would like to thank the government of Vietnam and the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam for inviting us in this Asian Futures Forum, particularly on the topic promoting Asian initiatives on conflict prevention. I think the Undersecretary General have already answered all the questions, so I'll just probably give some few examples. So we are indeed honored to share our peace-building experiences in the Philippines. My core message for this afternoon is that conflict prevention is not only a security agenda, but more importantly, it is also a governance, development, and partnership agenda. This morning, a lot have been discussed about the drivers of conflict, and I give you examples. One is inequality. It was mentioned, social exclusion, climate pressures, and just recently in the Philippines, we have a big earthquake yesterday, and there are casualties. Remember that it is in the same area in the 1970s, where we have a big earthquake also, where thousands were killed during those earthquakes. And these are the drivers of conflict in the Bangsamoro area, particularly in the Moro Gulf. We have other drivers of conflict like disinformation, cyber threats, and strategic competition. I will start small and become bigger and bigger as we relate that to the Asean. My key points that conflict prevention starts before violence occurs. The strategic question that we might ask is that how do we prevent tensions from becoming crisis? We should be able to have strong institutions, inclusive governance, citizens' participation, and of course, trust in government. The key message is that people who feel represented are less likely to support violence. Let me share the Bangsamoro experience. The important lessons are dialogue over confrontation. That's why that we have made and forged a peace agreement with the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, and we have created a framework for peace in that region where we have given them autonomy. At the same time, we have a normalization program for former combatants, their families, and their communities. And of course, the important lesson there is the more challenging part is the implementation to sustain peace. Agreements may end conflict, but implementation sustains peace. The 4 lessons that we have learned from the Bangsamoro experience that peace building continues after the signing. Even after the signing in 2014, we continue to build trust and confidence with the Moro Islamic Liberation Front as well as with the other groups in the area. Second is that inclusion matters. Women, the youth, indigenous people, and former combatants, their families and their communities, including the different stakeholders, are involved in the peace process. As we all know, in the Philippines, we are very the important one is the participation of women in the peace process, in the leadership, as well as in the peace-building activities. Third is that local governments are critical because we see that there are different dynamics in different areas in the Philippines. We have 7,641 islands, and in Mindanao alone, we have different islands also. We have different places, and dynamics from one local to another is different. That's why that local governments are critical in peace building. And that the 4th lesson is that they should be able to see the peace dividends, meaning what is it for them, for their livelihood, for their infrastructure, their services, and economic opportunities. When communities benefit from peace, they become its strongest advocates. Let me share to you a framework that we have developed in the Philippines where we disaggregated the program in a cluster of communities, cluster of municipalities, or cluster of provinces, so that we can apply this framework, what we call the 6 Peace Framework. It is the public, public-private partnership for planet, people, and peace. Meaning that peace cannot be delivered by government alone. We recognize that, and we should be able to let the communities participate, local governments, private sector, civil society, as well as development partners, including international community. Peace becomes durable when it creates opportunities and improve lives. And for our recommendations for the ASEANs that first, we should strengthen local peace infrastructure. Maybe at the different areas, even in our borders. We should be able to maintain or develop dialogue mechanisms in the different areas. We have many mechanisms. We have the Intergovernment Relations Body mechanism, which is actually a mechanism that connects the national government with the regional government as well as the local government. We have mediation platforms. We have the third-party monitoring team, international monitoring team, and many other mechanisms that we have as far as the peace process is concerned. Second recommendation is that we should be able to invest peace in areas where there are opportunities to create jobs, services, and livelihood. And recommendation number 3 is to promote responsible public-private partnership, as I've said. And lastly is to institutionalize Asian peace learning, because there are many practices that we can learn from Bangsamoro, the Aceh, other localities like in Cambodia and other peace initiatives. So peace is more than the absence of war, it's the presence of justice, opportunity, inclusion, and hope. If ASEAN is to remain a community of peace and prosperity, conflict prevention must become a shared responsibility. The true measure of our success is not how many conflicts we manage, but how many conflicts we prevent. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thanks very much for drawing on the Philippines' own experience to really help illustrate what can be done to prevent conflict. We do have time if there is a question or two before we turn to our last speaker. Is there anyone? Yes, I do see a hand up there, please.
Hello, good afternoon, Mr. Undersecretary. First of all, I'd like to send our biggest commiserations to the people of Mindanao, the Philippines, for the earthquake. So my question for you is that, do you think that people-to-people exchange plays a crucial role in promoting peace and unity? And how do we increase the accessibility of the wider majority of ASEAN citizens to the process of people-to-people exchange? Thank you.
Thank you. And is there a second question? And if I could remind people to introduce themselves if they have a question to ask. If not, if I could invite the Undersecretary to answer the question about people-to-people.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. Actually, this is very important. Dynamics in our peace education program, the people-to-people exchange, where we can learn from each other the dynamics from one country to another. That's why that we have participation in our transformation program, for example, for former combatants. We expose them to the different areas in the Philippines first and then to other countries. That's why that we will be able to exchange learnings from them, as well as from the other people from other countries can also learn from us, from the experiences in Bangsamoro. That's why that this is people-to-people exchange is very important, because as we exchange information from one another, we can learn from each other.
Thank you very much. If I can invite everyone to, again, express their appreciation for the Undersecretary's presentation. And I'll now pass the floor to our last lead speaker, His Excellency Dr. Chung Widja. to complete the presentations. Thank you.
Madam Ambassador, because I represent the Parliament, so I have to stick to the protocol. So first of all, I would like to pay my high appreciation to Mr. President of the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam, Dr. Vieng Huy Song, Madam Excellency, Madam Ambassador, Julian Bird, Ambassador of Australia to Vietnam, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, in my capacity as Secretary General of IPA, allow me to express my warmest congratulations to Vietnam for hosting the ASEAN Future Forum 2026, a leading country in our region that has consistently contributed to ASEAN's effort to maintain peace, stability, and regional resilience. I would like also to deeply thank the host country for the generous hospitality and the excellent arrangements provided for the meeting, and to express my most sincere appreciation to the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam for the personal invitation to speak on promoting ASEAN initiatives on conflict prevention. Three guiding questions steer our discussions, namely, first, the search of new tools, mechanisms, or frameworks on conflict prevention. Two, how to leverage our external partnerships in so doing. And third, how to translate the above into concrete commitments. The recent keynote address by Excellency To Lam, General Secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Vietnam and President of the Socialist Republic of Vietnam at the 23rd Shangri-La Dialogue on last 29th of May has set the tone and given, in fact, the responses that we need in order to be able to respond proactively with one voice. And this is the challenge, how to speak with one voice. To the unprecedented and unpredictable challenges that not only we in ASEAN, but the whole world, near and far, have been facing. Complex and complicated situations stay in front of us and warrant a quick and yet well-thought solutions. I think this is the essence of modern time because of the evolution of technology. We have no time but to respond immediately and well thought. So this is a very big challenge. This is the quintessential essence that hangs heavily in our quest, in our decision making. If I may summarize, we are facing a fragmentation of power in our world architecture. The resultant fragility of our global house has been gravely accentuated by the erosion of the system of international law, including the multilateral system based on the rule of law. This is precisely where parliaments, including the 10 and soon ASEAN parliaments to which I belong, have their role to play. Parliaments not only enact laws, equally important, they have a crucial oversight duty in the implementation of law, including international law. They have to ensure the rule of law in their respective countries and to harmonize them in the region. The ultimate choice in front of us is whether we choose right is might or might is right. The first choice would ensure equal treatment in front of law, harmony in our societies, and peace in our countries. The second choice would favor the use of force by the stronger ones to prevail at all costs. After the huge losses and destruction left behind by World War I and World War II, the world community of nations built the United Nations as the sole body responsible for international peace and security. The problem is this central pillar for world peace and security and for the supremacy of international law is now weakened in its central function, namely the UN and its core decision-making body, the Security Council. To quote Excellency To Lam, a rules-based order does not belong to any grouping of countries. It is the common foundation upon which large, medium, and small states alike can coexist peacefully, grounded in international law and the UN Charter, with full respect for independence, sovereignty, territorial integrity, non-use or threat of force, peaceful settlement of disputes, sovereignty, and integrity, end of the quote. These are normative guiding principles that ASEAN itself has taken on her own and inked into its regional treaty on amity and cooperation in Southeast Asia, in short TAC, the 50 years anniversary of which we celebrate this year. This leads us to ponder if we should search for new tools, mechanisms, or frameworks on conflict prevention. Conflicts, including military ones, not only loom near and far, but most unfortunately also in our own backyard, in our own region of ASEAN, and this has been said clearly this morning. Besides the treaty, there are the ASEAN Charter and other mechanisms to secure peace and stability in our state-to-state relations, like the ASEAN Regional Forum, the ADMM, ADMM+, ASEAN Plus 3, or the East Asia Summit. So there is already a plethora of mechanisms that ASEAN has created. The cardinal question is to ensure quality above quantity. What we have inked has to be implemented in spirit and letters. I think this is the key. Principles agreed upon solemnly in the Treaty on Amity and Cooperation are not a selective menu item, whereas one tends to interpret that it would encourage non-interference into domestic affairs, whereas the first principle is about the respect for independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. There are legally binding instruments which come as a whole. The three crises that His Excellency Tolam has outlined, the crisis of international order, the crisis of development model, and the crisis of strategic trust amplify this stringent necessity. A case in point, Madam Ambassador, is Chapter 4 about Pacific settlement of disputes, Article 14 about constituting a High Council as a continuing body. If I could further ponder, a suggestion has been made by a former Foreign Secretary to also establish a Conseil des Sages, in English it would be then the Council of Wise Men, to advise the High Council of the TAC. Reflection could also be made to beef up the competence of the existing ASEAN Institute for Peace and Reconciliation in order for it to serve the High Council of the Treaty. ASEAN governments may also wish to revisit, when necessary, the ASEAN Charter to try and identify any parts that warrant further qualifications aiming at the full and effective implementation of the mandates in light of such a challenging and rapidly evolving security architecture, whereby security is understood as multidimensional and multi-layered, impacting each other. In summary, Madam, ASEAN centrality in our own security architecture is not given, but deserved. We have to show credibility when concrete deeds follow declarations to ensure, and I would like to quote again His Excellency Tolam, that competition does not slide into confrontation, that lines of connectivity does not become lines of division, and that one's nation's security does not become another security, as we see now in Southeast Asia. I remember the ASEAN-China Summit that we did back then in 1999 in Poao, when then Excellency Foreign Minister Wang Yi was still some leader of China, and we discussed about the deepest political crisis in Nepal, namely the killing of the whole royal family, we might remember, in Nepal. And Excellency Wang Yi told us, and it inspired us very deeply, is that China believes in the rule by virtue. And I think that this is a very deep philosophy, to stick to the rule by virtue, but not bottom up, but up to the bottom. So the up has to be a good model to the bottom to follow. From IPA's perspective, though not binding like state diplomacy, parliamentary diplomacy is fluid by nature. Both complement each other. By the mandate given by the people we represent, and there are nearly 700 million people in ASEAN, parliamentarians, including women parliamentarians, contribute to the settlement of disputes and to reconciliation. At the upstream stage, parliaments have translated regional commitments into national laws, budgets, and policy frameworks. At the midstream stage, their representative and oversight roles can bring emerging risks and citizens' concern into policy discussions while enabling parliamentarians to support peace processes and trust-building efforts within their own constituencies. At the downstream stage, parliamentary oversight can support the effective follow-up of ASEAN initiatives and help ensure that lessons from crisis guide future prevention efforts. IPA stands ready to work closely hand-in-hand with ASEAN and all partners in advancing peace, stability, and people-centered regional cooperation. In this spirit, conflict prevention must be treated not as an occasional response to crisis, but as a continuous responsibility to ensure the rule of law in a spirit of accountability to the people, act early, sustain dialogue, and preserve peace and harmony through deliberate and collective efforts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Widja. And can I thank all three of our lead speakers who provided a really rich presentations to help inform our panelists. But before we proceed to our panelists, we do have a video message from the French Minister Delegate for Francophonie, International Partnerships and French Nationals Abroad, Madame Eleanor Carrois, to screen.
Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to address your assembly on the opening day of the 3rd Asian Future Forum. In Europe, as in Asia, our stability and our prosperity are increasingly threatened by the multiplication of conflicts throughout the world. It is a matter of concern for most societies, but we never talk about the wars that never broke out. Today, this is what we aim to address: work collectively on conflict prevention. In his speech at the Shangri-La Dialogue this year, General Secretary and President Tom Lam mentioned the importance of diplomatic escape routes. This means consultation channels, confidence-building initiatives, or forum discussions between officials to better understand each other before parties can draw into a spiral of escalation. The Shangri-La Dialogue itself and the Asian Future Forum are part of this logic. France's G7 presidency and the Avian Summit, less than 1 week away, is making its own efforts to encourage dialogue with the aim to promote stability, mutual understanding, and cooperation. Our aim is to use the G7 to draw collective solutions based on better development policies and fairer economic exchanges. President Emmanuel Macron, and his own keynote speech last year at the Shangri-La Dialogue, called for a coalition of independence between Europe and Asia. We want to bring together countries who share a commitment to multilateralism, open and regulated trade, as well as a willingness to bolster their own resilience and autonomy. Those are partnerships for peace in the sense that they build the conditions for mutual peaceful prosperity. We're also continuing our efforts on our joint protection initiative in the Strait of Hormuz. I wish to thank the Asian countries which took part in the presentation of this initiative last April. Just as Asian countries, we're attached to the Pacific settlement of disputes and the strict respect of international law. We consistently support the full implementation of the 5-point consensus regarding Myanmar, and we supported the Asian mediation efforts on the Cambodia-Thailand border dispute last year. Finally, we're also promoting the values of peace and partnership through Francophonie. I'm glad that for the first time since 1997, the Francophonie Summit will be back in Southeast Asia and will be organized in Cambodia. We count on your support in order to continue the partnership between France and Asian. Thank you very much.
We can now pass to the panel session. And again, can I thank our lead speakers for setting the scene so well. But let me invite to the stage our four panelists. We have His Excellency Wang Qing, Ambassador of the People's Republic of China to ASEAN, Dr. Susanna Patton, Director of Asia Engagement, RMIT, and Non-Resident Fellow of the Lowy Institute of Australia, Professor Thitinan Pongsiradrak, Senior Fellow, Chulalongkorn University, Thailand, and Dr. Prushan Parameshun, founder of ASEAN WONK. Are we missing something? Great, welcome to the stage. We all look forward to hearing your insights, and then we'll open the floor for Q&A. Just a gentle reminder, 3 minutes each, so we have plenty of time for questions and answers. But let me pass the floor first to Your Excellency, Ambassador Zheng.
Okay. Thank you, Your Excellency, Madam Ambassador. Excellencies, distinguished guests, it's a great pleasure to join this discussion on conflict prevention. I want to thank the organizer to give me this opportunity to share some thoughts on how China can work together with ASEAN countries and other external partners to make this region out of conflict and create a better future. When we talk about the international situation in recent times, some words are frequently mentioned: uncertainty, volatility, turbulence, just as we heard this morning by the speech by some leaders of ASEAN countries. With this backdrop, China proposed to build a community with a shared future for mankind, together with some initiatives, namely Global Development Initiative, Security Initiative, Civilization Initiative, and Governance Initiative. These ideas not only offer China's solution on how to build a world of lasting peace, universal security, and common prosperity, but also provide some conceptual and practical ideas for our region to build a peaceful, safe, secure, prosperous, and beautiful home free of conflict. So let me elaborate a little on these ideas. For our region to stay away from conflict, first and foremost, the Cold War mentality and bloc confrontation must be abandoned, and a common, comprehensive, cooperative, and sustainable security should be pursued. China stands ready to work hand in hand with ASEAN countries to make best use of ASEAN-led mechanisms such as the ARF, EAS, to foster a balanced, effective, and sustainable regional security architecture, actively build a model of security for Asia that features sharing will and war, seeking common ground while sharing differences, and prioritizing dialogue and consultation over confrontation, partnership over alliance, and win-win results over zero-sum game. For our region to stay away from conflict, the foundation of development must be strengthened to provide strong buttresses for lasting peace. China always believes that development is a master key to all problems. The starting point and objective of all China-ASEAN cooperation follow a people-centered approach and are aimed to raise the sense of fulfillment among people. China will continue working closely with ASEAN to always put development front and center in agenda, deepen cooperation on the global development initiative, make full use of the Belt and Road Initiative, CAFTA 3.0, as well as RCEP to promote trade, investment, and integrated industrial supply chain, foster new drivers for growth. Thirdly, mutual understanding and strategic trust must be deepened. Unity in diversity is ASEAN's identity, while harmony without uniformity is a tenet traditional Chinese philosophy. In recent years, guided by Global Civilization Initiative, China and ASEAN have jointly designated the thematic years for cultural, people-to-people, educational, and media exchanges, as well as tourism cooperation. All this have effectively fostered closer ties and deeper understanding among our 2 billion plus people. We will continue to do so. Last but not least, multilateralism should be upheld. Both China and ASEAN initiated and advocated the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, which are also reflected in UN Charter and the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation in Southeast Asia, TAC. I think China is a permanent member of UN Security Council member and also the first non-ASEAN HCP to the TAC. China stands ready to work with ASEAN countries to jointly safeguard all of these important principles, namely sovereignty, equality, non-interference in internal affairs, non-use of force, and the peaceful settlement of disputes. So let me stop here. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. I now pass the floor to Dr. Susanna Patton. Susanna, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. It's a real pleasure to be here at this important conference. I want to make, following my Malaysian colleague, Professor Quick's example, I'll try and limit myself to 3 points. The first point I want to make is really to acknowledge ASEAN's success when it comes to conflict prevention. The cooperative habits that ASEAN has established, whether they be in the defence field, in the economic or the socio-cultural field, have contributed greatly to the absence of conflict in this region. And equally, where we see those type of people-to-people exchanges tapering away, that should be a sign for concern. So it's interesting for me to reflect. We heard earlier about the state of US-China relations at the leader level, but if we look at the people-to-people exchanges, like the number of US students who are studying in China, it's declined a lot. And I think that's concerning for all of us when it comes to the outlook for relations between the superpowers. The second point that I would make is that conferences like this play an important part in conflict prevention because they encourage dialogue. And so I couldn't disagree more, in fact, with the comment that was made by the US Defense Secretary at the recent Shangri-La dialogue that the world needs something, he said something like more submarines, fewer conferences. I think conferences are essential. But the point that I want to make secondly is that we need to think about 2 different scenarios when it comes to conflict prevention. On the one hand, we often think about mechanisms that are designed to prevent accidental conflict, that are designed to prevent escalation. And so this is when we talk about mechanisms like hotlines and confidence-building mechanisms. But the reality is that conflict can also be started deliberately. Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 was not an accident, even if Russia miscalculated what the costs of its invasion would be. So conflicts that are initiated by revisionist powers can't be prevented by traditional conflict prevention mechanisms like codes of conduct and hotlines. They can only be prevented by changing the potential aggressor's calculus. So how do we do that? I think two main elements. One is, of course, deterrence. There is no substitute for military deterrence. And it's the bipolar distribution of power that has kept Asia peaceful, while other regions of the world, like Europe and the Middle East, have experienced disastrous conflicts over the last few years. Now, deterrence is not ASEAN's raison d'etre, so I won't dwell on that. But where ASEAN, I think, can provide a significant contribution to changing the calculus of a revisionist power is when it comes to consensus. Because the higher the degree of regional consensus, the harder it is for any actor to change the status quo. As Singapore's Defence Minister said recently, we must not think we can do without principles, institutions and norms. So when ASEAN speaks clearly about violations of international norms that affect it and the region, it does important work in conflict prevention. So, for example, the recent statement by ASEAN foreign ministers on the conflict in the Middle East is a good example of ASEAN speaking out clearly about issues that affect it. So we can talk about new mechanisms and new ways that ASEAN could enhance its conflict prevention capabilities, like augmenting the good officer's role of the ASEAN Secretary General, or establishing a more well-resourced conflict prevention unit in the ASEAN Secretariat and so forth. But ultimately, I believe that ASEAN's greatest power is its normative power, when it speaks clearly with one voice about violations to the norms that are important to this region.
Thanks. Yes, over to you, Professor.
Thank you very much. I would like to first start with thanking, sincerely commending Dr. Nguyen Hung Son and the DAV team. It's a great show, really, showing some leadership. It's now a major strategic dialogue, I think, AFF. Much has been said today already, and much more to be said and should be said. Time is short, so I'll go in three directions, very short. First, about the conflict prevention. So by definition, we have conflicts, and I'll go into the conflicts in a minute. But what has happened here? I mean, how did we get here? I think that we've taken our eyes off the ball, meaning that for decades, we've been talking about confidence-building measures, CBMs, and preventive diplomacy for decades. But I think that we have not been emphasizing that or kind of harping that on that as much as we should. I partly blame the pandemic. I think that we did not have face-to-face meetings for a few years. And suddenly, after the pandemic, we have conflicts, more conflicts. And how to prevent that, I think there's no going around it. There has to be trust, there has to be confidence, and rebuilding the trust and confidence is what we need to do. You cannot avoid conflict without trust and confidence, so strategic trust is what we're talking about today. There are three main conflicts in Southeast Asia, ASEAN. The Myanmar internal conflict, civil war, coup in 2021, civil war since then. There's been a sham election, and the military now is looking to consolidate. And I think time is on their side. ASEAN might have to deal with them. But ASEAN has to be careful not to alienate the resistance, the coalition, in case they regain the upper hand. So that's one conflict, a big thorn. The Thailand-Cambodia conflict, I think, let me get to that last. South China Sea tension, confrontation, that is a more kind of ASEAN vis-a-vis broader conflict. And on the South China Sea, I think ASEAN has to think about how to galvanize the Mekong countries with the other maritime countries and to make Mekong issues and South China Sea issues an ASEAN issue. I think that's the name of the game. I mean, otherwise ASEAN is disparate on both of these spaces. Now, Thailand, Cambodia, big conflict, big clash, and I think this has already been talked about today. Moving forward, once you have conflict like this, trust is broken down, you need to rebuild, you need to manage and resolve. And to do that, I think there's some concrete mechanisms, such as the ASEAN Observers Team. They have to be broader, they have to involve more military, not just the attaches, but some kind of not a peacekeeping force, but more military involvement from the other ASEAN countries to help monitor the border areas, where the clashes took place. Now, beyond that, I also think that leadership, the domestic leadership in Thailand and Cambodia has to strengthen. They have to show some courage and some way ahead by being willing to stare down and stand up for ASEAN, stare down the domestic nationalist sentiments, because the national sentiments are running very high on both sides. So I'm very concerned about the Thailand-Cambodia potential clash in the year ahead. Finally, despite all these problems, and ASEAN now is more problematic than ever on these conflict lines, but I'm interesting that I'm very heartened by the fact that there's more focus on ASEAN than before. There's more ASEAN activities, there's more talk, there's more conferences. And we need that, we need face-to-face. And the reason is because you look at China, dumping, overcapacity, certainly a big concern. You look at the US, the unilateral tariffs, protectionism. So where does ASEAN look to? It has to look elsewhere, and not least itself within ASEAN. ASEAN has to find answers for ASEAN. ASEAN never needs ASEAN more than now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, our last speaker on the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And let me start by thanking Yuan Hung Son and DAV for the invitation. Really great to be here. So it might be a little bit self-serving for me, sort of managing a publication called ASEAN Wong to say this, but I do think that to Titinan's point about ASEAN and the focus on the regional organization, there really has been quite a significant focus and emphasis on ASEAN. When I started the publication, I was very surprised to find that just within a few months of publishing it, there's an audience in over 130 countries globally and an interest in Southeast Asia and ASEAN. So it just reinforces the fact that ASEAN is very much a global story. There used to be a very traditional conception of ASEAN and Southeast Asia as being a crossroads of competition between major powers. But I think as some of the other speakers have pointed out earlier today, in an environment where there's so much conflict and so much fragmentation, ASEAN and Southeast Asia almost stands as an island, an oasis of stability in that context, right? When you're talking about economic growth, when you're talking about relative peace and stability. So when you think about it as a relative comparison, it is quite impressive. I'll just make 2 points just to reinforce the good points that have already been made. I think there are 2 balances that are going to be very key for ASEAN and for Southeast Asia to take into consideration within that conflict prevention agenda. One is the balance between the need to sort of build collaboration with the outside and to build capacity on the inside. And this is a very old theme. I just finished a book called Mandalas of Multi-Alignment, looking at Southeast Asia and alignments across really the past few decades, and I looked at some of the regional conceptions before ASEAN was founded. And one of the things that I found was a letter that was written by Malaysia's Prime Minister, Tunku Abdul Rahman, back in 1959, written to President Sukarno at the time of Indonesia, despite the differences that existed between Malaysia and Indonesia. And he pointed out that there was a real need to balance the look for help from the outside with the capacity to look at ourselves from the inside and building internal capacity. And I'll say that in the last few years, we have seen a number of efforts to do this. Indonesia's latest ASEAN chairmanship, the efforts to build up the secretariat, which were quite notable. The ideas like a code of conduct for the South China Sea, which has been an ongoing progress, but nonetheless something for ASEAN to work on at the ASEAN level, even as bilateral claimants talk about this as well. But I'll also just point out, even the ASEAN Geoeconomics Task Force, which is something which you never would have foreseen, the first ever ASEAN Geoeconomics report, quite significant. The second balance, just very quickly, is the balance between expected process and unexpected developments. And I think here, it's been very impressive to see ASEAN develop some of the ideas. Some of the ideas have not been realized. The ASEAN Peacekeeping Force that was proposed earlier, there have been other measures. Singapore, for example, tried to play a leadership role in expanding the code for unplanned encounters at sea, queues for the underwater domain. That hasn't been realized so far. But nonetheless, a lot of ideas coming up and a lot of potential for innovation. but I would just offer one closing remark, which is that irrespective of the mechanisms that exist, there also needs to be entrepreneurship by individuals to actually activate these mechanisms. And I go back to Pak Marty's very activist leadership back in 2012, when it was difficult for ASEAN to come up with a consensus on the South China Sea, very active shuttle diplomacy to salvage some kind of consensus. That was not written in any ASEAN document, but he took it upon himself to come up with this activist conception. And so I think even as we think about mechanisms and institutions, which are extremely important, it's going to be really important to also think about entrepreneurship and leadership at a personal level as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all four panelists. Some really interesting thoughts. We now have a good half hour for Q&A, so if people could put their hands up, and we'll take a few questions. Lady in white here on the left. Please introduce yourself, and if your question is directed to a particular panelist, let us know. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And I would like to direct this question to our collective panelists, especially Dr. Parameswaran. And can we also have the UN Global Perspective from Excellency Ms. Nakamitsu for this question as well, if possible? My question is, global tech companies are calling for a pause on AI development. What is your stance or the UN stand to manage AI risks, especially regarding security and conflict prevention? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll take another question or so. Yes, please, here on the right. Oh, sorry. Yes, we'll take you for the Austrian ambassador, followed by the French ambassador. Thank you.
Thanks. Two small remarks. One fits very well to what you said, madam. There are some initiatives going around using technology for peace. You can use the term peace tech. So this is something that's happening. Small initiatives, but I encourage all to reach out and talk to each other and see how we can put academia, researchers, peace NGOs, governments together to promote this topic. I think technology is neutral. It's neither good nor bad. It's how you use it. So there is a potential here to use for conflict. And a very small remark, if you want to use to look at conflict prevention examples, positive ones, the best one is in Asia. Is the Aceh peace process. It worked in 15 months with a mission on the ground after the tsunami, and the peace is lasting. Of course, the conflict never goes 100% away, but there is no violence. There have been elections, so look in your own region and draw the conclusions for future conflict prevention among yourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it was French ambassador, yes. Yes.
I'm not the French ambassador.
Oh, I'm sorry.
He's right there, though. No problem.
My eyesight is not great. Sorry.
No
Apologies.
I'm Brad Merg. I'm Senior Advisor at the Cambodian Institute for Cooperation and Peace. And question is related to Cambodia, Thailand, but particularly the question of ASEAN centrality. And I'd like to direct it to Ambassador Wang Qing. At the outset of the conflict, China invited the parties to China, to Shanghai, for initial discussions and proposed going through the Global Solidarity Initiative for resolution of this. Eventually, it was agreed that this would go to KL, Malaysia would chair, and we'd have both the US and China on one side. Subsequently, the Track 2 dialogues on this question have not been convened by an ASEAN state or an ASEAN think tank. The Fujian Consensus, et cetera, all of this comes out of Chinese meetings convened within the People's Republic of China. How does Beijing square its support with ASEAN centrality with essentially moving mechanisms forward that seem to be directly in contradiction to the principle of ASEAN centrality? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We might take, maybe one last one up the back before we go back to the panelists. Yes. I think standing up is a good idea. I can see you.
Hello. Okay. Thank you very much. My name is Titipon Ulin. I am representative from Lao Youth Bureau of the AFF. As a young person, I believe that the youth are not only beneficiary of the peace, but also the important stakeholder in meaningly and promoting across ASEAN. So my question is, how can ASEAN create formal and meaningful pathway for youth to contribute to conflict preventions and peace-building efforts, not only as beneficiary of peace, but as active partners in identifying risk, combating misinformation, and strengthening social cohesion across the regions? Because I believe that open for youth voice, open for the futures. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's take those questions now to the panel. Can I perhaps first ask Dr. Parashama the question about AI, and it was linked in a sense to the second remarks on technology from our Austrian colleague, or any of the other questions that were raised?
Great, thanks. I'll just say on AI safety, there's a real room for agency here. I think there are already conversations that are going on between the United States, China, and the so-called superpowers, major powers, about keeping AI out from certain forms of decision-making that have already been at play. But I think on the broader conversation about AI risks and safety, countries within Southeast Asia, including Singapore, have played not only an important regional role, but actually a really important global role in seeding new ideas and part of these conversations. So it's a very active space, and I think a very important space. The other part of the conversation that I think is really important is making clear that the digital domain and AI is a conversation not about transactions, it's a conversation about ecosystems. And Vietnam and a number of other countries in Southeast Asia have also been making this point. So when you think about AI, it's not just the tech stack, it's also the human resources that come with it. It's also making sure that benefits are provided in a more inclusive way. And so that's going to be really important. I mentioned Vietnam only because Vietnam is going to be chairing APEC next year, as Singapore is going to be chairing ASEAN. And so you have two very active Southeast Asian countries at both these forums that are going to be a really important part of the conversation as various external partners in ASEAN, including the United States, which just came up with a new AI ministerial that they just announced with Southeast Asian countries. So I think it's going to be very important for Southeast Asian countries to kind of navigate it on that perspective. I'll just say a quick point on Aceh. I think it's a really great example. One of my early experiences was working on the insurgency in southern Thailand and counterinsurgency. And actually, one of the people that I first contacted on Thailand during this time was Professor Titinan, who was very helpful and generous with his time. And I remember one of the experiences I had there was absolutely nothing to do with the research. The late ASEAN Secretary General Surin Pitsuwan brought some of us who were really interested in the insurgency to an Islamic boarding school, which had been part of his family generation all the way going back to his grandfather. And when we went through that school, he was trying to make a point about perceptions about radicalization and Islamic schools being a breeding ground for that, and sort of saying we need to have more of an inclusive conversation. But rather than doing that in a setting that was more formal, he chose to use this as a personal example of how this was affecting himself and his family on a personal capacity. So I think those experiences are also really powerful as we think about conflict and peace and conflict management. It goes back to stories and the power of anecdotes and people-to-people dynamics that we've talked about before.
Thank you very much. I wonder, Dr. Nagamitsu, would you like to comment on the AI question since it was specifically directed to you? Have we got a microphone for Dr. Nakamitsu down here at the front? A mic? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that very important question. I wanted to say that, at all of those conversations related to new technologies, in particular artificial intelligence, I always say that there are positives potentially these new technologies will bring incredible benefits to humankind. And that includes, of course, preventative efforts for conflict. Now, AI is basically technology that will enable us to process and analyze huge amounts of information and data. So that could be really useful about catching early signs of potential risks, which could develop into, if they are allowed to escalate, develop into conflicts. So even at the United Nations, we actually utilize artificial intelligence for example, for foresight activities to detect what might be trends that we see. So those things will be probably very useful for preventive diplomacy, early actions, early interventions to prevent further escalation. However, there are also negative aspects related to artificial intelligence. Many people know that in cyber domain, there are lots of nowadays bot accounts that really are also utilizing artificial intelligence technologies to create hateful messages that spread very rapidly, that escalates people's feelings, that could actually result in violence. So AI actually can exacerbate violence trends. So that, those negative aspects of artificial intelligence also need to be mitigated and then really minimized as well. So what does this mean? From the UN's perspectives, we think that there is a proper governance framework for the technology itself. The member states have decided that such discussions at the multilateral level will need to start. So there are early discussions that are already taking place at the United Nations, not by the Secretariat, by member states. We hope that having, what kind of governance frameworks will be necessary to maximize the benefit of AI, while at the same time mitigating the negative impact of the AI. This will be probably one of the most important and defining work that has to take place at the international level. Can this be only left to a handful of technologically and economically advanced countries? Our answer from the UN is no, because AI is a technology that will impact every single person living on this planet, and as a result, what we need is an inclusive platform where all nations and also civil society, academia, experts, industry can participate and then contribute to these discussions. So it's not just left to a handful of countries, and the UN can actually provide a very useful, most inclusive, universal platform. But of course, it's, as a result, inclusive mechanisms and dialogue processes can take time. But that is the reason why, from ASEAN, we can really count on ASEAN leaders to really work on this quite defining process with a sense of urgency and sense of a real responsibility that is a shared responsibility.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Under Secretary General. Back to the panel. I wonder if colleague Ambassador Wang Qing wants to respond on the ASEAN centrality question. Then I'll open it up to the rest of the panel on the question on youth, the role of youth, or any other comments in response to the questions. Ambassador.
Okay, thank you. Talking about ASEAN centrality, I think Chinese position and policy can be summarized just one word, that we support, we respect ASEAN centrality. How to understand it? I think it can be regarded as two levels. One is that we support the ASEAN-led mechanism. So if you see the architecture in this region, all of this mechanism is ASEAN led, and ASEAN can play a central role on it. AIF, EAS, APT, and all of this mechanism. So, just as as a vehicle, ASEAN can play the role of steering, make this vehicle moving forward towards the direction of cooperation and common prosperity. But other external partners can contribute the energy into it. So together, we can make this vehicle moving faster towards our objective, our goal. The second level is that we work together with ASEAN countries in ASEAN way. So through the practice of so many years, and ASEAN countries have the working approach of ASEAN way. I think this is based on consensus-based decision, respect to each other, equality. And all of this, I think, have its values. And we, China, we respect this working approach. So in Jakarta, where I work with my colleagues from ASEAN countries, and a lot of negotiation, a lot of consultation. And I think we discuss it on equal foot. And we never impose our will on ASEAN. All of our decision, every year we will negotiation on the deliverables, the documents for leaders meeting. So I think we respect the ASEAN way, decide by consensus. So all of this, I think, is what we can work together with ASEAN countries, continue to support and respect the ASEAN's centrality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The question on youth participation. Any members of the panel like to talk about the role of youth in conflict prevention? Dr. Tito.
Very quickly, I think that it's a good question from the youth representative. It's a natural question. I think the youth, of course, don't have the baggage that we are talking about today and tomorrow. There's never been more digital connectivity that we're seeing now in ASEAN. So I think that's something to build on. Apart from the other infrastructure, the aviation, the flights, and so on, the traveling within ASEAN, the visa-free ASEAN, the exchange programs at universities. I see a lot of young people at my university, also from Vietnam, but we need to see more. We see some from Myanmar, from Cambodia, but this kind of exchanges, people to people, but not just people to people, but the young people to young people connectivity is something that we may have maybe under stress in the recent past. And if the youth can be more connected and have a kind of a similar outlook and can kind of become kind of the ASEAN young citizens in a way with differences and divergences, this bodes well for the future of ASEAN.
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
I just wanted to make a quick additional point to that. I think it's also significant that for Southeast Asia, the sort of negotiation for some of these countries and the renegotiation of the demographic contract is occurring, right? I think one of the initial sort of older talking points with respect to Southeast Asia has been that it's home to a very young population. But actually some of these countries are going to be experiencing or are already experiencing aging in some sense. So as we think about the disruptive power of technologies like AI, you're also seeing forums like APEC under South Korea's chairmanship previously talk about these issues in tandem. So AI, but also demographics commensurately. And so I think the meaning of what is old and what is young is also changing in that context in Southeast Asia. So what is young is no longer something that you can talk about with respect to 20 or 30 or 40 years. It's happening now. And so a lot of countries have to renegotiate that contract. And so I think that's another interesting storyline to watch within Southeast Asia, how countries navigate this.
Thank you very much. We have time for a couple more questions. So, yes, perhaps some up the back, please. If we got the roving microphone.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all the panelists. I'm Airada, Thailand representative from AFF Youth Forum. So I would like to move the discussion beyond the conflicts and tension. But my question goes to Dr. Thitinan, as you mentioned earlier, that ASEAN, we are staying in the very challenging time because of US and China rivals. Do you think ASEAN can make any concrete solution or cooperation, particularly, for example, energy sovereignty or the possibility to work together, or any angle that you see that ASEAN can create the real impact or create the cooperation together by using these challenges? Thank you very much.
Thank you. One more question up the back.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I think that the topic that we are discussing today on conflict prevention is of extreme necessity for the region. When here we have the panel experts coming from Southeast Asia, from our region, and also experts coming from outside. So I have one question for the panelists. You see, recently, over the past few years, there have been a few conflicts that have taken place in our region. The conflict in Myanmar, the conflict between Thailand and Cambodia, and of course in a larger area that is the South China Sea. And the ASEAN, as far as the ASEAN is concerned, ASEAN has made a lot of efforts to a kind of settle this kind of conflict, to prevent the conflict from happening. We have seen the 5 consensus points that the ASEAN is trying to make, and also the mediation effort between Cambodia and Thailand. But it seems to me that these efforts have not brought back a kind of expected results. It seems that the ASEAN efforts have not been very successful over the past few years. So my question here, I understand that this kind of conflicts are very complex and very difficult to settle. But from the part of ASEAN, my question is that why ASEAN is not so successful in this kind of conflict prevention? Can you point out the reason lying behind and how to improve the ASEAN initiative in the future so that their initiative in the future can be more successful? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And maybe just one final question. I think there's a young woman standing up there.
Dear Excellencies, professors, and guests, I am Khánh, a delegate from Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam. So I would like to raise a question that what collective mechanism should ASEAN member states do to mitigate impacts for their citizens from the future conflicts and competitions between major powers? Thank you.
Thanks very much. I might throw this back to the panel. So we have 3 questions, really easy ones. What can ASEAN do about major power conflict? Why has ASEAN's efforts on conflict prevention not worked so far? And then the first question, which was to you, Professor T, about energy sovereignty. So why don't we start from the end? This will be the last round of comments. We've got 10 minutes to go. Let's start at the end with you, Dr. Parasamrathan, and we'll pass back along. Thank you.
Awesome, thanks. Very tough questions. Let me just make 2 quick points. I mean, I think the sense that ASEAN's mechanisms are not working in some of these conflicts and issues, ASEAN is not without its limitations. I will say that, as I think all of us have said on this panel and some of the other speakers have said earlier today, that's more of a reason to reinforce the importance of dialogues and even fora like this. I was struck in the break and during lunch how many discussions I had with individual panelists who were making the point that it was important for the leaders today of Thailand and Cambodia to be here, make references and be with each other, because these dialogues can sometimes serve as an important catalyst and mechanism for that. So that's one point. I think the second point I would make is I'm really struck by within some of these ASEAN mechanisms, and Australia and a number of countries have played a really important role in the conflict prevention agenda. But I also know from the diplomats who are doing the real hard work, you know, I just talk and write about these things, but the diplomats who are actually involved in these negotiations have mentioned that when there have been some tensions between major powers in these discussions on conflict prevention, a number of ASEAN and Southeast Asian countries have pushed back and said, this is a really important agenda and we need to move forward. The process is very important, but this is important for our region. And I think that that's a very significant development. It probably doesn't make a lot of headlines, but I do think that that is an important conception of ASEAN and Southeast Asian countries, a notion of agency that doesn't happen in the headlines, but also happens behind the scenes in a lot of the meetings. So I think that's also an important point to take into consideration. And the final thing I will say is, in a lot of these conflicts and that we see, whether it's Thailand, Cambodia, or Myanmar, ASEAN is an option, but I think as Susanna was saying earlier, this is a multi-layered conversation. So Southeast Asian countries can choose to exercise the ASEAN option and sort of deal with that, but they also might go to other international institutions, they might go to bilateral mechanisms. I think it's important to recognize that the way in which they choose those mechanisms doesn't necessarily mean that ASEAN has its limitations. It might, but it also means that these countries need to naturally exercise their agency about which pathways they're choosing at a particular time. So ASEAN option should be there, the institution should be built, but the other option should also not be discounted because countries may choose to go that way as well.
Thanks very much, Professor Tijanan.
Just to build on Prashant's contribution, I mean, the question for us, the challenge is how to make ASEAN not just necessary, but sufficient to be enough to solve the problem of the day. The 3 questions are related in the same frame, really. I mean, the great powers. So, you know, for the great powers, I'm very heartened to see that the 2 questions on this side came from very young participants. The great powers, when they are divided, when they're in conflict, right, ASEAN tends to be divided. If you can look at the Cold War, Soviet Union, US, when the Soviet Union, US, not in balance, not at peace, region was divided between ASEAN and Indochina. Now you have US-China. Confrontation, conflict, ASEAN is divided. So, you know, for ASEAN to do well, you really need the great powers to be at relative peace and in relative balance. But not having that, then we have to manage and navigate. Coming to the question about the, you know, the 3 conflicts. The Myanmar conflict is there's a different nature of this conflict, right? So the Myanmar conflict is an internal conflict within Myanmar. It's a civil war after the coup in February 2021. Thailand, Cambodia is a bilateral conflict. And, you know, South China Sea is a broader ASEAN, broader conflict. And in each, ASEAN has a role. I mean, it made big efforts. 5-point consensus in April 2021 in response to the Myanmar coup. Thailand, Cambodia, fragile ceasefire, but there's a ceasefire brokered, mediated by Malaysia last year, and that can be built on this year and still maintain, very fragile. And then the Code of Conduct, DOC and COC in the South China Sea. So ASEAN has done all of that, but you have to understand the structural DNA of ASEAN is not a supranational entity, so therefore there are some limitations. So at issue for us, the challenge for us is how to maximize within the ceiling of not having supranational kind of platform, how to maximize that space. And ASEAN has done pretty well in some areas. For example, there's a Chiang Mai initiative multilateralized on monetary policy, currency swaps agreement. Now, going back to the question from the young lady here from Thailand, on energy crisis, the ASEAN leaders have given a mandate to AREA, and the Japanese have done so much for ASEAN with ASEAN. AREA is now tasked to come up with an idea, a paper, a plan, a blueprint for stockpiling crude oil in ASEAN to respond and react to future energy crises like the Iran war, Strait of Hormuz. So there are efforts, but how to make it enough without the external contributions. This is the name of the game for ASEAN. I think that with these kind of dialogues, ideas can be brokered, can be approached, broached, and then that's how we get somewhere. But so far, there's some efforts. How to make it not just necessary but sufficient is our challenge.
Thank you. Susanna.
Yeah, I would agree very much with the comments from Ajahn Tijinan. I disagree with the premise that ASEAN has not done anything about those three conflicts. I think if we look, yes, okay, ASEAN has not been able to solve the crisis in Myanmar or fully resolve the Cambodia-Thailand dispute or resolve disputes in the South China Sea. But in each of them, I think ASEAN has played a critical and meaningful role and made the countries, especially in the case of the South China Sea, it's very clear, and I think the ASEAN countries all appreciate that by working together, they're stronger than if they work individually. And so I think, we should not undersell the success of ASEAN in those areas, challenging as they are. To the question around ASEAN's practical contribution on energy, I think one limiting factor is the reality that different ASEAN countries have different energy mixes, and so they have different priorities. Some are more exposed to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz than others. But one area where I think ASEAN really has achieved a great deal of success is when it comes to trade and economic issues, and in particular to maintaining a commitment to trade liberalisation. It's very striking to me that in a world where you have really big countries walking away from a commitment to open rules-based trade. In Southeast Asia, there's been no country that has responded in a retaliatory way to the imposition of tariffs, and instead they've actually redoubled their commitment to internal trade liberalisation. So I think that is an example of where ASEAN countries have a common interest, they can work together extremely effectively.
Thanks, Susanna. Ambassador, you have 1 minute left.
Okay, so yeah, and let me make some response to the first questions about what role ASEAN can play for the strategic stability between China and the United States. And I think the most significant point for the constructive strategic stability relationship between China and the United States is that it opens new space for cooperation and lower the risk of confrontation. So, and we all agree that the cooperation between China and the United States benefit to the world. And so all of countries are the stakeholder of stability, strategic stability between China and the United States. So let me share a story with you. 13 years ago, I worked in Washington, D.C. in our embassy. There, I was involved in the discussion about the cooperation between China and the United States to help some African countries to fight against Ebola. And we have some cooperation and make the pandemic in some African countries under control. 3 years ago, I worked in our embassy in Sierra Leone as Chinese ambassador to Sierra Leone. So all my friends in Sierra Leone give very highly comment about cooperation between China and the United States. So today here, we have a lot of issues we can cooperate in this region about the energy security, about our fight against the transnational crime, scam, online gambling. So all of these issues need more cooperation, not just between China and the United States, but all stakeholders in this region. So I think that's what ASEAN countries can play. And we can work together towards the results-oriented cooperation in ASEAN-led mechanism, EAS, ARF. We can have some more practical cooperation. ASEAN can play very important role on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I thank all of the panelists? In the interest of time, I certainly won't attempt to sum it up, but I think it was a very rich discussion on conflict prevention and also the role that ASEAN can and in fact really must play if we're going to keep this region stable, secure and prosperous. So can I ask you all to join me in thanking our panelists and speakers? And I think we even kept a time, so I think there's now a break for 15 minutes before we resume the next session. But thank you again, everyone, for your participation. Thank you, panelists.
Thank you for Ambassador Gillian Bird and our distinguished lead speakers and panelists for a highly productive discussion on conflict prevention. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we will now take a short break before the final session of the day. We invite all participants to take a moment to refresh and indulge in the tea break just outside the conference room, and we kindly ask that you return to your seats in approximately 15 minutes. The program will resume at 4:20 in this afternoon. Thank you. Once again, we invite all participants to take a moment to refresh and indulge in the tea break just outside the conference room, and we kindly ask that you return to your seats in approximately 15 minutes. The program will resume at 4:20 in this afternoon. Thank you.